This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Hey guys, time to get in on the action for the biggest moments in basketball with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projections, place your entry, and win up to 100 times your money. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit of up to $100. Just download the Prize Picks app and use the code GET100. That's code GET100 on Prize Picks for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more. Pick less. It's that easy.
Welcome to the X-Cast, X-Files Podwatch, episode 28, covering The List and Too Shy. I'm your host, Zach Moore, and with me is Andrew Blaker. What's up, Andrew?
Hey, Zach. How you doing?
Good, man. Good. A couple of exciting episodes to talk about today, huh?
Yeah, we do. Got some good middle of season 3 action going on.
Middle of season 3, middle of the road episodes, as well, speaking of the middle. But let's jump right into it. The List is our first episode we're talking about today. Written and directed by Chris Carter. Directed by David Nutter, and aired on October 20th, 1995. So, what are your thoughts on The List? First impressions?
When I first watched the episode, I don't know how many years ago, it was an average episode for me. I liked it. I didn't find it particularly memorable. I think that was just because I was watching them all for the first time. But on rewatch several times, I think it's a pretty solid episode, all in all, by Chris Carter. I think it's a bit darker, some of the themes than most of the other X-Files episodes we have, but I think it's a pretty strong episode.
Yeah, this episode starts out with an execution, So we've seen the gas chamber on the show. We've seen the electric chair. So I'm like, what are we going to see next? A lethal injection? I mean, we're going to see every form of execution we have in the United States. But yeah, it does start pretty dark. It's one of these episodes, of course, written and directed by Chris Carter. So those can always be, whenever he has complete creative control, which we'll talk about, and I'm sure many other hosts will talk about down the line here, it can kind of go either way, And this one, it had a good balance. It had a good atmosphere. I think it was pretty dark, and it created an intriguing mystery. If that mystery pays off or not is really the question. What did you think about the mechanism of the resurrection here of the main character?
I mean, it definitely... That would probably be, for me, one of the weaker elements in the whole thing. But I think when you consider that he is the character of Nietzsche Manley, the one who's seemingly resurrected, his motive for everything is this revenge, and it's so powerful, and he's been in prison for so many years. He's been nursing it, and I think what Carter was trying to imply was that there was such power behind that vengeance and that metaphysical urge to resurrect himself. So, I mean, it is a little bit of a stretch, but I think that he's such a strong character that believing the drive behind what he wants to do is so powerful that I can buy it.
This is an episode where, and this is a common thing in a lot of middle-of-the-road X-Files episodes, is Mulder and Scully, if you took them out of the episode, it would make no difference, because they achieved nothing. All the people on the list, the titular list, get killed. So it's like, what did they really accomplish here between two of them? They're always one step behind of what's all going on, and that's always a frustrating thing, because you want your protagonists to be active protagonists, right? And Mulder and Scully, it's not that they're passive and like they're not doing anything. They're just ineffectual at stopping anything, which makes them not that active protagonists,
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I agree 100%. I mean, there's this episode, and there are certain others where, and they're, as compared to some later episodes, they are in this episode a lot. But you're right; they're struggling to kind of understand what it is, and they're very much a supporting character in this. So, what I like most about the episode, and what I think Carter did really effectively, was the foreboding atmosphere. It's a very dark episode. It's a very moody kind of episode. The art design, the cinematography is excellent, I think. To date, this was the most expensive episode they did. I mean, they had to construct that prison set and everything. I believe that was one of the more expensive episodes up to that point anyway, but I feel like the atmosphere benefits a lot, given that most of the action happens indoors. It's very gritty. There's some pretty graphic shots, a decapitated head, the nasty car crash at the end, and that just adds to the atmosphere. So in that sense, story aside, I feel like that's the biggest strength for the episode. And at least for me, I feel like there can be some elements of the story that you might look at and say, yeah, a little weak, but this really helps build the case, so to speak, that, it helps you overlook some of those elements, at least for me.
And you mentioned the car crash at the end. I did like how the warden got his comeuppance at the end of the episode, because he's one of these classic the man villains, is the guy in charge of stuff, kind of like a Nurse Ratchet from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, one of these guys that is just like a despicable person who has power over these inmates and clearly abuses it and sees himself as above them, and he was just an intriguing foil throughout the whole episode. I was very pleased to see him, because you think he's going to get away at the end, he's driving along, and he looks in his rearview mirror, and who's there but Nietzsche, and he gets him.
And I thought Mulder and Scully aside, some of the other supporting characters, you have Nietzsche's wife, or widow, I guess you should say. I felt like there was a lot of good. Carter really wrote some good characters here. I mean, even if you don't necessarily know a whole lot about them, the acting is very good, and I feel like you do get to know some of the characters just in essence of what this story presents. I feel like Nietzsche was a very strong character, very much an anti-hero, how he's presented, and I felt like that really added to the episode. You mentioned earlier, written and directed by Chris Carter, and I did want to I made some notes on that, kind of reflecting on Chris Carter as a writer, as a director, especially in light of the recent season 10. People have some pretty strong opinions both ways on that. Like I said, The List, I would say he did, in my opinion, pretty strong episode for him. And he's written some, but he's a mixed bag for me. Dwayne Barry's one of my favorite episodes, season 2. I believe that was the first episode he wrote and directed. You have other greats that he, if not directed, at least wrote, like Irresistible, Postmodern Prometheus. You have several of those standalone episodes that are regarded as classics, but then you also, when he hits, he's really pretty good, but when he misses, it's really a miss. I mean, you've got, in my opinion, again, you've got episodes like Fight Club, First Person Shooter, Improbable in the final, or season 9, I should say. Episodes that, depending on who you talk to, are generally not very well regarded.
Yeah, the standalone episodes that he writes and directs are more of a mixed bag than the mythology ones. I actually think, when he's because who knows the mythology better than Chris Carter himself, right? So I feel like he has a good grasp at that. But you're right, if you take the Chris Carter canon of the whole show, right, this would be on the upper end of the episodes that he is, solely responsible for, definitely. All right, our next episode is Too Shy, written by Jeffrey Vlaming, directed by David Nutter, and aired on November 3rd, 1995. Now, this episode, a little bit before its time, I think, as far as like the online dating thing goes. Catfish, that movie and TV shows kind of made internet relationships kind of a phenomenon, and who are you really talking to and that kind of thing. But this episode, it did tackle something that was a little fidgety, a little awkward when you're talking about, this guy is going after overweight women.
Yeah, this is one of those episodes that comes to my mind as the perfect epitome of an average, run-of-the-mill, monster of the week episode, to be quite honest. Say what you will about the story, maybe not the greatest in terms of plotting, but certainly a memorable villain. Some gross-out moments. Sucking the fatty tissue from his victims, I know. And I don't mean it as a bad thing when I say average run-of-the-mill. I really don't. It's almost like comfort food, I think, at this point. It's one of those you could return to and, fairly predictable. Characterization is, probably somewhere in the middle, but it's comfort food. It's procedural. It's the formula that you've come to expect with the show. One thing I do really like about this episode, it's not a negative to me because it roots the X-Files in the time it is. It is extraordinarily outdated when you consider. I mean, it was before its time in terms of online dating. That is true, but the technology. I mean, we have personal fax machines here. We have the Leviathan desktop computers from the 90s. I mean, that's a second character in the episode, and I mean, I was watching it with this Podwatch talk in mind, and I was just laughing at how it really is rooted in the 90s. I think the story could very well happen today because of the prevalence of online dating, but the woman uses a personal fax machine to receive these faxes of the suspect, and it's very over the top in terms of the technology that was used, but I thought that was a strong suit for it.
You're right about it being dated. That is the funny thing. You go back to especially these early seasons of the X-Files. I mean, at least everybody had cell phones. So because you can divide all fiction between a pre-cell phone and a post-cell phone world, really. But even the X-Files, especially in those early episodes, they're going through microfiche or listening to cassette tapes. I would be interested to know people who were just a little too young to remember the world without any of this kind of thing, like how they even wrap their mind around that. but anyway, no, you didn't mention the freak of the week, the monster of the week, the villain of the week, played by Timothy Carhart. I think he did a great job. He's not Toombs, he's not Donnie Pfaster, but he's still pretty good for a human villain, with an asterisk by that, because you don't really know what he is, but with his name is Virgil Incanto. So part of me thought, like, man, is this guy has he been around for hundreds of years, writing this poetry or these books, is that his angle? But they don't really go into it there, and I feel like that suffered from an overstuffed episode. You have way too much going on here. You have he's basically a fat-sucking vampire, but he's also a online dating predator. You have the Italian poetry. You have his neighbor who has a crush on him. Then you have her blind daughter. There's just so much going on. I feel like if they would have just taken one or two things out, they could have fleshed out more, and this guy could have been more of a Toombs. You could have really delved into his history and just. Because I feel like that there could have been more mythology there to be taking out, to maybe see more where he was coming from than just, he's the fat sucking vampire. Which, by the way, this is where Smallville must have gotten the idea for Amy Adams as her fat sucking vampire in their episode. They had a season 1 episode where they have Amy Adams, who now plays ironically Lois Lane in the DC extended universe, on screen. But before that, she was a guest star on Smallville, and what did she do? She was a fat sucking vampire, much like the Freak of the Week in this episode. So there's my typical standard Smallville spiel that you've come to expect. So carry on, Andrew. Forgive me for my tangent.
Yeah, I agree. I agree that it's a bit overstuffed. The character of Jessie, the blind girl, whose mother is the landlord, maybe? It kind of made me think she was the landlord or something, but she seemed a little bit out of place. I wasn't quite sure what her purpose in the story was, but I agree with what you're saying. They definitely added it in. Virgil Incanto, very, a very kind of medieval sounding name, a romantic name, and he is a academic that specializes in this obscure, centuries old romantic literature. So there were some nice touches there, but they didn't really get to expand on a lot of that because, there was just so much going on and it wasn't really streamlined. So that would be one criticism of it. There's a lot of threads that the story could have gone into that it kind of just threw out there, and you never really knew what would happen with it.
I did like the bait and switch at the end, where you thought he was going one way, and in fact he was still in the apartment there. And then the victim, and I think that was actually an empowering ending as well. His intended victim ended up saving the day at the end, so I think that was a nice message towards what they were going for here, because there were some definite feminism tones to it, especially when you have to. The women were being targeted, and then you have the sexist detective, and then you have the whole thing about people with body image issues and being overweight and all that, and how they felt more comfortable with the online dating, which made them more easy targets. So there was a lot here to unpack, and it's an interesting episode, not a failure at all, just a little overstuffed, and then ultimately just a middle of the road episode, all things considered.
I think that's a pretty fair assessment. Not a bad episode. Like I said, comfort food. You want a kind of gross out episode. You want some pretty solid acting, at least from the lead actor in here. And, fairly predictable plots and turns, I guess. Nothing wrong with that. I truly mean that. I think it's what fans have come to expect from Monster of the Week episodes. So I think it's a pretty solid episode in that sense.
All right, Andrew, it's been fun talking about these 2 episodes of The X-Files with you today. If people want to find you out there online, where can they find you?
I'm pretty active with the Facebook group. That's the X-Files Basement, Xcast Podcast Watch Group. I got that name wrong, but search X-Files Basement for the Xcast, and you'll find us on there. And it's a great online community. There's a lot of stuff going on right now with news about Season 11 and just some great discussions on there, and that's where all of our videos are released and linked to. So great group of people on there.
All right, well, you can find me at Too Shy on Twitter. No, I'm just kidding. You can find me at MoronZach on Twitter. That's MOOREONZACH. I'm also the host of my own podcast, Always Hold On to Smallville. We talk about each and every episode of that young Superman show. You can find us on Twitter at Always Smallville with 1 S. I'm also the host of Standard Orbit, a Star Trek original series podcast. You can find us on the Trek FM network at Trek FM on Twitter. As for the Xcast itself, you can find us at the X_cast on Twitter, and our Facebook page and group, the Xcast X-Files Podcast Fan Group. As you were saying, Andrew, we got a lot of fun conversation going over there. It's exciting time speculating about Season 11. Well, the Podwatch will be back tomorrow, covering The Walk and Aubulette. But until then, trust no one.